Hello, this is part 2 of Nutrition 2. So in part 1, we looked at how we can find out nutrient values of foods that we eat, so how much carbohydrate or protein or micronutrients are in food. We looked at online food databases and the strengths of that in terms of being able to have a quick way to break down your daily intake or recipes or things like that to find out what the nutrient value is, and their drawbacks, which is primarily that it's time consuming to do that. So it's useful if you wanted to get a snapshot of what you were eating and were you eating too much or too little of something. But from not very practical from a grocery shopping and day-to-day meal planning point of view. We also looked at food labeling in Canada and how to use those food labels, and I think that they're a very important part of grocery shopping. So particularly when you want to compare products and choose products. So I want a cracker, what's the best type of cracker for me? What's the best type of bread? What's the best type of yogurt? And so on. We looked at what Health Canada does with regards to nutrition and meal planning, and so we looked at their dietary reference intakes, and we looked at the Canada Food Guide, and ultimately I have decided, certainly from a personal point of view, that the best tool is the Harvard's Healthy Eating Plate, and to use that tool in terms of getting all of the right foods and nutrients in the right quantities. So I think that that's really an excellent tool for planning meals. So we're going to look at designing a menu, and keep in mind that when you're designing a menu, it's best to plan a menu for at least a week, and ideally maybe 2 weeks, and just have it kind of rotate every 2 weeks. That makes it less tedious and less, you get a less emergency, oh my goodness, we're here tonight and what are we going to have? Well, let's do pizza, and you kind of fall into that trap. So planning them for a couple weeks is a good idea. There are three main things. Your meals should be planned for nutritional balance, and again, using that simple healthy eating plate is a really good way to make sure you got enough fruit and vegetables and enough protein and enough whole grains and etc. You also want to look at appeal, and so rather than having, for example, mashed potatoes, white fish, and cauliflower, where we've got all the same colors and textures and etc. Try for a variety. Crispy foods with soft foods and different colors, and you want the plate to look nice. And this is regardless of special diets. So whether a person is eating all pureed food or whether they're eating, food in its normal texture, you still want to make it appealing. There's nothing worse than looking at a bunch of brown goo and feeling like this is going to satisfy your appetite. And the last thing is you need to take into account an individual's preferences and any special dietary needs that he or she may have. I think you're going to run into, in the field of developmental services, a lot of specific factors that are going to affect a person's nutrient needs or their diet. So we have to look at a couple things. So some conditions that a person may have actually change the amount of nutrients that person needs. So for example, if we look at somebody that has athetoid cerebral palsy, then they're going to need an increased energy need, and that's because just simply moving around and getting, you're trying to use your motor skills takes up more energy than somebody that does not have athetoid cerebral palsy. Or, for example, somebody with Down syndrome. Individuals with Down syndrome have lower metabolic rates, and so they're going to actually have decreased energy needs. The energy needs of a person may change during a lifetime. So, for example, a person may have feeding difficulties in infancy, and that means that they have to consume, a lot more calories. But as the child grows, then they start to gain weight, and they have decreased energy needs. There may be issues like swallowing problems, for example, again with cerebral palsy, and a person's medications may interfere with their metabolism, may increase or decrease their metabolic rate. may affect the absorption of certain nutrients and may affect their appetite. So some conditions, like medications, may interfere with the ability of that person to intake adequate amounts of nutrients. Some conditions may require a specific diet, and sometimes making sure that a person's nutritious diet and they're getting the right amounts of all the nutrients with their preferences, that may require some creativity and a little bit of extra effort in planning and in making things appealing. So for example, here are just some examples of some special diets that you may run into. So some individuals that have chewing or swallowing difficulties, they may require soft food, so food that is not necessarily pureed, but has a softer texture, or minced or pureed, or liquids that have to be thickened so that they don't aspirate or breathe in that liquid. There may be people that require a low sugar or a low glycemic index type of diet, so individuals that have type 2 diabetes, or sometimes people that are trying to lose some weight. The gluten casein-free is a particular diet, so for example, kids that are on the autism spectrum, they may have certain behavioral problems that seem to be better if they don't consume gluten, which is a protein found in wheat, or casein, which is a protein found in dairy. Now this is controversial and it seems to vary from individual to individual, but you may have you may be supporting a child whose parents are trying it, or who has found that seems to work well. Kids with autism often have GI issues, and so sometimes gluten and casein-free diets may help with those, even if they don't help with behavioral issues. Low-calorie diets or high-calorie diets, high-protein diets, diets that have to have increased fiber because of chronic constipation. There may be diets that where certain foods have to be eliminated because of allergies, or certain foods that cause GI discomfort. There may be a liquid diet that is given directly into the GI tract. We call that an enteric tube diet. Vegetarian, there may be cultural limitations, so for example, kosher or halal types of diets. So all of these things need to be considered when you're planning a menu for a particular person. Just a note about artificial sweeteners, and I'm sticking this in here because sometimes when we talk about low-calorie diets, or we talk about low glycemic index diets, then there's a tendency to talk about foods that have artificial sweeteners and as a replacement for foods that contain sugars. There's been quite a lot of research recently about artificial sweeteners. So these include things like aspartame, or sucralose, or thaumatin, or sugar alcohols like xylitol or stevia. And the biggest thing about artificial sweeteners is that we don't know the long-term health risks or benefits about artificial sweeteners. There is, for adults, short-term use in small quantities is probably okay. Kids should definitely avoid artificial sweeteners and all sorts of diet foods. Some studies show that they reduce the intake of calories and promote weight loss, but more recent research shows that in fact it may cause weight gain and an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So a 2013 study linked sweeteners with an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes. Another study followed participants for 7 to 8 years and showed that those that drank artificially sweetened drinks, like Diet Coke for example, had a 47% higher increase in body fat than those that didn't. And what their theory is that the human brain responds to sweetness with signals to eat more sweet things. And so by providing a sweet taste without any calories, artificial sweeteners cause increased cravings for sweet foods, and this adds up to excess calories. Just by the way, stevia is made from the leaves of a shrub that grows in South and Central America, and it's become really popular. There are no long-term studies yet for that. Bottom line is, I would reduce your intake of sugar and try to avoid the artificial sweeteners if possible. The last thing I want to talk about with regards to menu planning is sustainability. So looking beyond the grocery store and your immediate food needs. So this is a multifaceted issue and affects both the food production system and our diets. Both of those things play a crucial role. Our world's population is rapidly expanding, and it's estimated that there will be over 9 billion people on our planet in as little as 25 years. And so it's essential that food sustainability be a priority to ensure that we have access to enough high-quality, nutritious foods. Food systems throughout the world are currently not sustainable. At present, almost 1 billion persons are not getting enough food, and most of the 7 billion inhabitants of the world eat diets that are poor in quality. So we need to develop practices that meet our society's food needs, but also protect our environment. And that's going to ensure that we secure a food supply. So we need to ask, where does food come from, how was it grown, and where was it produced? So food production places an enormous demand upon our natural resources. Agriculture alone is responsible for about 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, with almost half caused by livestock production alone. Agriculture also accounts for the majority of deforestation, total freshwater withdrawals, and loss of species in marine systems. In the U.S., vegetables, fruits, and nuts currently account for only 2% of crop acreage. By contrast, 60% is for cereal grains and seeds grown mostly for production of edible oils. The greatest uses of corn and soybeans are fuel, so things like ethanol and biodiesel, livestock feed, and ingredients for high processed food, so high fructose corn syrup, which is probably the worst type of sugar available. And only 10% of grains that are grown in the U.S. are for direct consumption by humans. So we really need to look for sustainable food sources, and we may need to shift the way our food is produced. This may require that we alter our diets slightly to include less processed food, for sure, and less meat and more fruit and vegetables. This would create a more diversified farm landscape away from the current system, which is dominated mainly by these corn and soybean crops. So personally, what could we do to promote sustainability? And I think that we could take a look at our personal food choices. Does it mean that we have to, do radical changes to our menu? I don't think so. I think that we can make choices in the grocery store. We can alter our diet in little steps, and we can choose foods that are good for ourselves personally and also the planetary health. In general, if we consume less red meat, that would have a huge impact. The other thing is to try to minimize food waste and practice things like mindful eating, so that where we don't consume huge quantities at a sitting, we eat just what we need to be full. So don't underestimate our power as consumers. We have a powerful role in developing a sustainable food production system. So if we ate fruits and vegetables at the recommended levels, so half of our Harvard food plate, for example, then farmers would start to grow a lot more of these foods. So if we change our demand for things like meat and dairy products, either up or down, that has significant implications on how much grain farmers grow, because farm livestock consumes grains in such large quantities. And so by increasing the amount of of vegetables and fruit that we consume, then this can not only benefit us from a nutritional standpoint, but from a food sustainability standpoint. So I promised you that I would give you the secret to nutritional utopia in 7 words. And really, in the words of Michael Pollan, who I believe has really distilled what we need to do for both ourselves and our planet. We need to eat food, and what he means by eat food is eat real food, eat whole foods. So not yogurt tubes and pizza pockets. That's not real food. Eat food that your great-great-great-great-grandmother would recognize. Eat, apples and, cheese and dairy products and those types of real whole foods. So eat food, not too much, so as much as we need to feel full. And if we consume more fruits and vegetables, we will feel full with less food, and mostly plants. There is a practical activity in meal planning. This is an optional practical activity, and I'm going to post it up in Brightspace, and it will be worth extra HPH dollars, so bonus marks, aka bonus marks. So this will be explained up in the activity posted up in Brightspace. I'll create a section that's specifically in Brightspace for practical activities and bonus point opportunities. All right, well, I hope that you have enjoyed our discussion on nutrition. There are going to be some activities that you can participate in as the semester goes that is related to nutrition, and I hope that I can share some more ideas about that, and that we can have some more discussions about that in class. Have a great day today. Bye-bye.